Thank you very much, Alden. And so just following from Alden's context in which we arrive in Bonn, certainly as CAN, we recognize the urgency of the problem, and we do certainly want to see the ambition levels related to that very urgency. One of the key long-term goals that we have set for our objectives to address climate change is, of course, a long-term goal to achieve the phase-in of renewable energy and the phase-out of fossil fuels by 2050. That's a very important goal. Transforming the energy systems, the key drivers of climate, is going to be a critical objective. And so what does that mean for action in Bonn itself? This is very relevant to the current agenda in Bonn and towards Paris. We are currently dealing with the issue under what is called Workstream 2, the pre-2020 actions required to address the ambition gap. We are facing a huge, what is called a gigaton gap, so the shortfall between what is on the table right now by way of actions that countries have committed to, but what is needed in terms of the science, that gap is a huge gap and is also growing. And if we do not address the pre-2020 gap, then the long-term goal is going to be unachievable. So for us, the key priority here in the Bonn session would be to address the concrete actions taken to address the ambition gap in the pre-2020 period, and we would propose that actions, scaled up actions around renewable energy, energy efficiency does go a long way to addressing that gigaton gap. Of course, part of this is the provision of funding. And as Alden has said, the Green Climate Fund is open for business. We need to see that money deployed as soon as possible to address the scaled up actions required, especially in renewable energy and energy efficiency in the short term. So certainly in Bonn, we would like to see the process defined for an outcome in Lima, a decision in Lima about what can be done in a concrete way to address the pre-2020 difficulties and challenges that we face. Secondly, of course, as you know, the ministers have arrived. We are going to be listening to what they'll be saying about the commitments around addressing both pre-2020 things, but hopefully already start hearing signals and commitments about the future agreement. And for our preparations for Paris, things need to happen in Bonn. And certainly it needs to happen in Bonn to be ready for Lima, because success in Lima is success in Paris. What are those things? We certainly need to have the process for defining a draft text being delivered by Lima. So we need to know the timelines around that. We need to know what those elements are for the draft text, and parties need to reach agreement about what those elements are. And then we certainly need to get into some form of negotiating mode. At least by October, we should have something that is ready for negotiation in Lima. That work has to start now in Bonn. So there's certainly a lot of work that negotiators have to do to prepare themselves for a draft text that the COP president in Lima is expecting. The second element is, of course, the big issue, and we've just come out of the ADP plenary. One of the big issues that the co-chairs have defined for discussion and clarity at this Bonn session is in the area of what is called the internationally determined, nationally, sorry, these acronyms change all the time, intended nationally determined contributions. In other words, what countries are going to be committing to, their pledges. So there are different elements that need to be agreed to about how that will be defined. The one is, of course, all the information requirements that parties would have to submit when pledging, so that there's comparability, there's transparency, we know what we're working with, we can assess the adequacy levels. So that's the one element. The second element is, of course, the process for this to happen. So once parties submit their pledges, and as Alden says, we would want that to happen sooner than later, what do we do with this? How do we actually assess its fairness and its adequacies, the levels of ambition? Does that happen after they've submitted it, between that period to Paris, and hopefully by Paris things would have been ratcheted up. Does this happen after Paris? All these issues are having to be finalized in Bonn. We cannot go into a process beyond this session without that level of agreement defined, because we want countries to go back home and already start working on their pledges. So certainly the time frames are very critical around this. And as Alden's already indicated, we of course as CAN and all the CAN members certainly urge countries to present those nationally determined contributions in the context of the science and in the context of equity. So we would want to see fairness and we would want to see ambition when parties submit their pledges. There's lots of work to be done in this session. We believe that the session with the co-chairs presenting draft decision text already starts the ball rolling. It's a good way to start the discussions. We're hoping parties will engage with this and that things will move quite quickly in terms of the work that is set out for them on the agenda of this Bonn session. So thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Tasneem. I'd like to